There exists a formidable level of mental and physical strength that makes an individual seem almost invincible, a state achieved by the legendary Japanese swordsman Miyamoto Musashi over 400 years ago. Musashi, who won over 60 duels starting from the age of 13 without ever losing, was neither the strongest nor the fastest physically, but he cultivated an unbreakable mind and a body without limits. Before his death, he documented his methods in the Book of Five Rings, which serves as a precise map for transforming oneself into something extraordinary. However, Musashi's approach is not about adding motivation or techniques. It is fundamentally about elimination, removing everything that obstructs one's path to strength. The narrative then shifts to a modern man named Lucas, a 32-year-old engineer living an ordinary life plagued by weakness in both body and mind, characterized by broken promises, procrastination, and ultimately a panic attack that forced him to confront his lack of mental fitness. His doctor's advice to train his nervous system led him to discover Musashi's teachings. Delving into the Book of Five Rings, Lucas first encountered the principle of having no preferences and not depending on any particular weapon, which taught him that true strength means performing in any condition without relying on perfect circumstances. Applying this, he began eliminating his own dependencies by starting a simple, unconditional practice of daily push-ups that continued regardless of travel or illness. As his physical consistency grew, he faced his next challenge, a restless mind, which he addressed through the concept of Heijoshin, the everyday, unchanging mind. By learning to observe his anxiety without reacting, he rewired his emotional responses and experienced a breakthrough when he remained calm during a public outburst from his boss. This mental training was complemented by the physical rigor of Sini Noi, the way of the warrior, which he tested through an extreme challenge of 100 daily push-ups for 30 days, proving to himself that perceived impossibilities could be conquered through relentless effort. He then integrated Zanshin, the mind that remains, into his life, maintaining awareness after completing tasks to solidify his lessons, which led to a noticeable change in his presence that others began to comment on. Lucas's newfound resilience was truly tested when he was laid off. Instead of panicking, his mind remained still, embodying the principle of Fudoshin. While his colleagues spiraled, he calmly secured a better job with a higher salary within weeks. In his new role, he applied Heijoshin, the strategy of emptiness, focusing not on winning but on having no weaknesses, being utterly reliable, which led to a swift promotion. After months of transformation, Lucas confronted his final internal fear of losing his progress, which led him to Sutami abandoning the self. By detaching from outcomes and external validation, his discipline became not something he did, but who he was, achieving the state of Kenzen Echi, where the practitioner and the practice are one. This complete transformation made his presence a mirror for others, reflecting their own lack of discipline and making them uncomfortable. In the end, Lucas realized that Musashi's legacy is not about adding traits but about removing the non-essential until practice becomes identity. The daunting level of strength that seems superhuman is simply the result of a willingness to do what is necessary, eliminate dependencies. Practice until it becomes who you are, and abandon everything non-essential, a path most avoid because it is uncomfortable but which leads to the ultimate prize of complete self-mastery. The transcript presents a compelling modern adaptation of classical Japanese swordsmanship philosophy, but there are several layers worth examining more deeply. What makes this narrative particularly effective is how it translates 17th century warrior concepts into practical contemporary applications. The elimination principle. Beyond minimalism, the transcript's central thesis, that strength comes from removal rather than addition, deserves expansion. When Musashi writes about having no preferences and depending on no particular weapon, he's addressing something more profound than mere flexibility. He's speaking to the human tendency to create psychological attachments that become vulnerabilities. In Lucas's journey, this manifests as dependency on external conditions, equipment, sleep quality, a supportive environment. But the transcript could explore how these dependencies operate at deeper levels. Identity dependencies. Lucas initially identified as someone trying to be disciplined, which inherently contains the possibility of failure. The transformation occurs when discipline becomes identity. I am someone who doesn't break my word, rather than, I'm trying to keep my promises. Emotional dependencies. The transcript touches on this with Heijoshin, but could further explore how humans become addicted to emotional states, needing excitement, avoiding boredom, seeking validation. The still mind doesn't just observe emotions, it ceases to require them for motivation. Narrative dependencies. Humans live by stories about themselves. Lucas's panic attack shattered his old story, but the transcript could examine how Musashi's philosophy ultimately transcends storytelling altogether. The void strategy Heijoshin isn't just about tactics. It's about operating without the constant internal narrative that most people mistake for consciousness itself. The physiological dimension. The transcript mentions the Stanford neuroscientist briefly, but the biological reality of what Lucas experienced deserves more attention. When he practiced non-reactive observation, he was literally restructuring his brain amygdala habituation, The amygdala doesn't distinguish between physical threats and social anxiety. Each time Lucas observed fear without reacting, he was teaching his threat detection system that meetings, traffic, and difficult conversations aren't life or death situations. Over 105 days, this becomes physiological reality, not just psychological coping. Vagus nerve activation, the deep breathing mentioned, activates the ventral vagal complex, part of the parasympathetic nervous system. Regular practice literally strengthens the neural pathways that enable calm under pressure. This isn't metaphor, it's measurable biology. Cortisol regulation. Chronically reactive people swim in cortisol. Lucas's practice likely normalized his stress hormone levels, which would affect everything from sleep quality to cognitive function to physical recovery from exercise. The transcript mentions the 100 push-up challenge primarily as mental training, but the hormonal and neurological effects of consistent physical exertion, particularly testosterone optimization, endorphin regulation, and dopamine reset, are profound. Lucas wasn't just building mental toughness, he was creating a biochemical foundation for resilience. The social dynamics of transformation. The transcript ends with an intriguing observation. People began avoiding Lucas because his presence became uncomfortable. This deserves deeper examination because it reveals something crucial about the path Musashi describes. The mirror effect. When someone eliminates hesitation, fear, and validation seeking, they become a living standard against which others unconsciously measure themselves. Most people prefer to lower the standard rather than raise themselves. Lucas's coworkers didn't dislike him, they disliked what his existence revealed about their own choices. The isolation paradox. True mastery often correlates with solitude. Musashi died alone in a cave. The transcript presents this neutrally, but there's a tension here worth exploring. Does the path to invincibility require accepting loneliness? Or does it simply filter out those who cannot tolerate your growth? Relational dynamics. Lucas's wife commented he was getting too serious. The transcript doesn't explore how he navigated this. Did he compromise? Did he try to bring her along? Did their relationship strengthen or suffer? These questions matter because most people attempting this path aren't single. They're embedded in families, friendships, and communities that may resist their transformation. The void strategy. Practical applications. The transcript explains Heijoshin as fighting not to lose, rather than fighting to win. But this concept has implications beyond the workplace. Examples given in negotiation. Most people enter negotiations wanting something specific, which creates attachment and therefore weakness. The void approach means entering with complete clarity about what you won't accept, but openness about outcomes. This paradoxical combination often produces better results than aggressive goal-seeking. In creativity, the best work rarely comes from forcing inspiration. Musashi's approach suggests creating conditions where good work can emerge, eliminating distractions, maintaining practice, then allowing the void to fill naturally. This aligns with what we know about flow states. In relationships, the transcript mentions Lucas simply never broke his word. This is Heijoshin applied to connection. Reliability creates safety. Safety enables depth. Most relationship problems stem not from grand failures but from accumulated small breaks in trust. Eliminate those and deeper dynamics can emerge naturally. The developmental stages. The transcript presents Lucas's journey as somewhat linear, but Musashi's philosophy suggests something more spiral-like. Each principle re-encountered at deeper levels. Stage 1 External discipline. Days 140. Lucas begins with mechanical practice. This is necessary but insufficient. The body learns before the mind understands. Stage 2 Emotional regulation. Days 49 of Heijoshin emerges. The practitioner can now observe internal states without being controlled by them. This is where most people stop, functional but not transformed. Stage 91 Ho5. The 100 push-up challenge represents physical proof of mental principles. Body and mind begin integrating. This is where resilience becomes reliable rather than occasional. Practice becomes identity. The person no longer has discipline, they are disciplined. This is qualitatively different from earlier stages. Stage 5 Self-transcendence. Beyond 1 year. Suit me, abandoning the self. The practitioner no longer identifies even with their practice. This is the void Musashi describes. The transcript touches this but doesn't fully explore its implications. When you're not attached to being the disciplined person, what remains? And is that the ultimate freedom or a different kind of prison? Cultural and historical context. The transcript uses Musashi's name and concepts but doesn't deeply explore the historical man, which limits understanding of why his methods were so extreme. The Battle of Sekigahara. Musashi fought at age 13 in one of Japan's bloodiest battles. He wasn't theorizing about combat from a safe distance. He survived wholesale slaughter as a child. His philosophy emerged from genuine trauma processed through discipline. The Wanderer period. For decades, Musashi traveled Japan challenging schools and accepting duels. He wasn't a settled master teaching comfortable students. He was constantly tested, constantly at risk. This explains why his methods emphasize adaptability and elimination rather than accumulation. The cave years. He wrote the Book of 5 Rings in a cave during his final months, having outlived most of his contemporaries and witnessed the transition from constant warfare to Tokugawa peace. The book isn't just combat manual. It's a distillation of a life lived at maximum intensity, written by someone who knows he's dying. Understanding this context makes the principles more visceral. Lucas's 1-5-day challenge, however impressive, is training compared to Musashi's lived reality. This isn't to diminish modern application, but to acknowledge that the original context was literally life or death, which shaped the extremity of the philosophy. The shadow side, the transcript presents Lucas's transformation as unequivocally positive, but Musashi's path has shadows worth acknowledging: emotional cost. The still mind that doesn't react also doesn't experience certain kinds of joy. Spontaneity, playfulness, and innocent enthusiasm may diminish. Lucas's wife noticed he was too serious. This is a real trade-off. Relational distance: people who operate from the void can seem cold or detached. Lucas's colleagues found him uncomfortable. This isn't necessarily bad, but it's real. Mastery often correlates with a certain isolation. The perfection trap, the principle of no weaknesses, can become its own attachment. Some practitioners become obsessed with eliminating every flaw, which paradoxically creates the very rigidity Musashi warned against. The invincibility illusion: Musashi never lost a duel, but he also never faced a gun. He died in a cave alone, having outlived his era. Invincibility is always contextual. Lucas got a better job, but he remains subject to cancer, car accidents, economic collapse. The transcript could acknowledge that scary strength is still human strength, impressive but not supernatural. Practical extensions: if the transcript were to continue Lucas's story, several directions would deepen the application, teaching others. At some point, the transformed individual must decide whether to transmit what they've learned. Does teaching dilute mastery or deepen it? Musashi taught, but selectively. Lucas might face this choice. The next pile after stabilizing at the new job, what then? The void strategy applied to life purpose might lead to uncomfortable questions. If you've eliminated weaknesses and secured comfort, what's worth risking yourself for? Intergenerational transmission. Lucas has children. How does he raise them? Can you transmit this path, or must each person discover it themselves? Forcing discipline on children often backfires. Modeling it works better but requires patience. Lucas might struggle with physical decline. What happens when the body inevitably ages? Musashi's philosophy prepared him for death. Lucas still hasn't faced this. The ultimate test of mental and physical strength isn't peak performance, it's graceful decline. Philosophical underpinnings: the transcript hints at, but doesn't fully articulate, the Zen and Shinto foundations of Musashi's thought: mu nothingness. The void isn't empty in the sense of absence. It's empty in the sense of potential, formless but capable of taking any form. Lucas's no preferences approach accesses this, but the transcript could explore how mu differs from nihilism or detachment. Kensho, seeing one's nature. The still mind ultimately isn't about controlling reactions. It's about seeing clearly what you are beyond reactions. Lucas glimpses this but hasn't fully explored it. The practice of observing thoughts without reaction eventually leads to the question: who is observing? That inquiry is the heart of Zen. Bushido evolution. Musashi's code predates formalized Bushido and differs from the samurai ideal popularized later. He was more pragmatic, less romantic. The transcript's emphasis on reliability over brilliance captures this, but could contrast Musashi's approach with other warrior traditions. The neuroscience deep dive. The Stanford neuroscientist gets one paragraph, but the research deserves expansion. Neuroplasticity timelines. The 1-5-day timeframe aligns with research on habit formation and neural restructuring. Approximately 66 days for automaticity, 90 days for identity integration. Lucas's journey follows predictable neurological patterns. Default mode network. The constant internal narrative most people experience, self-talk, worry, planning, correlates with the brain's default mode network. Meditation and presence practices quiet this network. Lucas's just observation approach would progressively weaken DM activation, which correlates with reduced anxiety and increased flow states. Interoceptive accuracy. Lucas learned to sense his racing heart and sweating palms without reacting. This is interoceptive training, accurate perception of internal body states. High interoceptive accuracy correlates with emotional regulation. Low accuracy correlates with panic disorders. He wasn't just coping, he was literally learning to read his body correctly. Dopamine resetting. The 100 push-up challenge with no external reward would reset dopamine sensitivity. Modern life floods the brain with cheap dopamine screens, sugar, novelty. Extended effort with delayed reward restores the dopamine system's ability to find satisfaction in sustained work. Lucas wasn't just building discipline, he was healing his reward circuitry. The writing style and rhetoric. The transcript uses specific rhetorical techniques worth noting. The second-person pivot. The question is, why aren't you doing it? This direct address creates discomfort and engagement. It's a classic motivational technique, but effectively deployed. The contrast structure. Lucas's old pattern versus new pattern, repeated throughout, creates clear before-after images that make transformation seem tangible. The expert quote. A brief authority citation. Stanford neuroscientist, sports psychologist adds credibility without overwhelming the narrative. The open loop. The transcript begins with, "There's a level," and ends with, "See you in the next video," creating continuity. This is YouTube rhetoric adapted to text. Repetition with variation. Key phrases so eliminate dependencies. Practice becomes identity. Repeat throughout, aiding retention while slightly varying context to avoid monotony. Critiques and limitations. A balanced analysis should note potential issues. Survivorship bias. The transcript presents one success story. How many people attempt this path and fail? Musashi's method works for some, but the transcript doesn't acknowledge selection effects. Simplification. Complex philosophical traditions become bullet points. This is necessary for accessibility but loses nuance. Musashi's original text is more ambiguous and less prescriptive than the transcript suggests. Individualism. The path described is solitary. Collectivist cultures might approach transformation differently, emphasizing harmony and relationship alongside discipline. The transcript doesn't address cultural relativity. Economic assumptions. Lucas's transformation occurs within a stable career context. Different economic realities might require different approaches. The path to 100 push-ups is universal. The path to better job offers is not. Gender dynamics. Lucas is male, Musashi is male. The examples skew male. The principles are gender neutral, but the presentation isn't. A female reader might need to translate examples to her context. Conclusion. The transcript successfully translates classical warrior philosophy into accessible modern narrative. Its strength lies in concrete examples, clear principles, and the Lucas character arc that demonstrates rather than just explains. The deeper dimensions, neurological, relational, philosophical, enrich understanding for readers who want to go beyond surface application. Ultimately, the transcript's core message resonates because it addresses a universal human challenge, the gap between what we intend and what we execute, and the possibility of closing that gap through patient, relentless practice. Whether one follows Musashi's specific path or adapts the principles to their own context, the invitation remains: eliminate the non-essential until only capability remains.